Okay. Bene, buongiorno a tutti.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to see all of you here in person after a whole year of being on Zoom in front of a computer screen. I'm very happy. I say hello to all of those of you who are here in person, but all those of you as well who are following us on YouTube. And thankfully, this edition of the meeting has enabled everybody to participate in this friendship online, to give greater exposure to all those who want to participate to the event. I welcome our three speakers who will give us about half an hour of dialogue. All three are here with us connected, and it is my great pleasure to welcome them here today. Aleksandr Archangel'skij, author, TV host, journalist of the Russian newspaper Zvezda, TV host on TV programs concerning current affairs. He's also a historian. He has published texts on the life of the Tsar and his time, Nicholas I, and he teaches at the higher school in Moscow as well. We have Luciano Violante, our second speaker. I hope you can hear the applause. He's President Emeritus of the Chamber of Deputies. He is a lawyer and has had a great career both in Parliament but also in university. He's a great friend of the meeting, and he is president now a group that has worked on the group in the Parliament that has worked on the Constitution. And last but not least, we have Joseph Weiler. A great protagonist of the meeting. We listed all your presentations here, starting from 2005 to 2015, to the last couple of years. And the possibility of having this meeting together online gives us the opportunity to give, as I said, great exposure both online and here in person. So, democracy. Let's take up this topic once more. So, there is one more meeting left dedicated to education, but democracy is a topic that has come up quite often in our meetings here. And we have talked about a dramatic aspect about democracy, which is the crisis of political parties and the distance between them and the public, especially regarding Italian politics. We've talked about the relationship between state and politics, and now we'd like to look towards the future of democracy and what is needed to bring it forward in politics, but not only. Politics is a fundamental aspect of human life, and since we're talking about the I and the courage to say I, great lesson imparted to us by Javier Prades, we know that a very important part of human experience is politics, and we would like for courage to be expressed in the political sphere, the courage of each of us. We're very lucky to have these three speakers with us here, because each of them see an aspect of the democratic experience. We can't, in 1 hour, think of recalling all of the theory on which democracy is based on, and all the institutions that uphold it. But I'd like to start by asking them to give their voice on their history, on their stories, on their studies. What is democracy in their countries, and why are we so attached to this word, despite the fact that we see very evidently the limitations of democracy appearing? And we're very struck by what's happening in Afghanistan, where all our attempts to export democracy, and even though the American president has denied this as an actual scope, an aim, basically these attempts have failed. And reflecting on the problems that we saw in this terrible event, we'd like to take advantage of this as a way to find a lesson, a moral, out of this tragic event. So we can start with a first round of questions and ask them, what is their feeling? What's the dominant feeling when they hear the word democracy? And then we will have a second round where we would like to be more precise in this definition. So I would give the floor firstly to Aleksandr Archangel'skij and ask him about what's happening in Russia. So I will try to read in order to save time. I'm neither a political scientist nor a politician. This is a limitation of mine, but it seems to me it also gives me a certain advantage, for I do not need to take account of contingent interests to advocate compromise solutions, which are sometimes unavoidable, to renounce ideals because of the economic situation. Democracy is not just about free political institutions and transparent decision-making procedures that can be monitored by society. Democracy is first and foremost a political form of solidarity. It allows and even obliges to offer mutual support across state borders, to conduct dialogue, to humanize any sphere of activity, from economics to ecology. For this reason, it is inevitably linked to the principle of the open society. Open in the sense that we do not enclose ourselves in national interests, and also in the sense that we do not defend ourselves against our neighbors, on our borders or far away, by erecting Chinese walls. The pivotal book of secular Europe, the Odyssey, reminds us that we are all pilgrims in this world searching for our Ithaca. And the pivotal book of religious Europe, the Bible, continually speaks to us of love for our neighbor, of dialogue with the Samaritans, of fraternal unity lived in community, of overcoming one's own ethnic, ideological, and territorial limitations. Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to every creature, says Christ, to everyone regardless of borders. Of course, Democrats are not obliged to read Homer and go to church, but these are the roots of our democracy. If we look at the political events of the last 2 years from the perspective of this ideal, we must recognize that democratic institutions have been considerably weakened, while authoritarian and hybrid institutions have been considerably strengthened. The problem is not only that giant China has shown the efficiency of digital control, which can be used for good but evidently also for evil. Things are much more complex than this. During the pandemic, the economy and the people suffered, but many Western politicians won elections, and the bureaucracy in general benefited from the tragedy. There are no longer any gilets jaunes in France, yellow vests. The migration crisis in Germany has diminished dramatically. There's no longer any talk of the Catalan problem in Spain. The European Commission passes its resolutions without any particular resistance, and so on. And all this, thanks to what? In part, thanks to the restrictions on freedoms that are inevitable in times of emergency situations, but also of freedom of movement. And also thanks to the fact that people, sorely tired, focus more on domestic, national, local issues than on world ones, global ones. Some of the uncomfortable duties of democracy can be sacrificed, such as responsibility for outsiders. Politically, this is more convenient, simpler. In fact, problems migrate with the people, and as long as you have managed to close the borders a little, to pull the reins of government a little, the passage of other people's problems is also lessened. It must be said that in the 1970s and 1980s, the era of the Iron Curtain, isolation between the USSR and the Western world, was a reality. But on both sides of the curtain, there were great leaders who upheld the ideal of an open society, and their words resonated with the masses. I will mention just two names: Andrei Sakharov, whose centenary must just commemorated, and Pope John Paul II, who would have been 101 years old. But I could name dozens of others, no less great names, from Don Luigi Giussani to Václav Havel, from Vladimir Bukovsky to Father Aleksandr. I certainly don't need to remind you that the Rimini meeting, the movement of communal liberation itself, are part of this grandiose project of hopes in a society of solidarity, of the dream of a Christian democracy and a democracy of human ideals. I carried out a great project with video interviews with Soviet dissidents, and almost all of them, including convinced nationalists, spoke of the importance of the European and American solidarity institutions that existed then. I stress this twice. It was not state solidarity, but civil solidarity. In the event of being expelled from the country and deprived of citizenship, the dissident knew that he would not be left alone to deal with his problems, that various forms of support, including moral support, would be put in place. Manuscripts were not allowed to be destroyed. There was an alternative system of Russian language publishers, radio stations, newspapers in the West, and then there were the personal efforts of well-known intellectuals such as Heinrich Böll. Today, however, there is a danger that a pragmatic approach will triumph. In Afghanistan, tens of thousands of women who believed in the possibility of exporting democracy, who were educated, who took part in public life for 20 years, have been abandoned to their fate and are now condemned to remain in the power of archaic men until the end of their lives. But what can we do about this? They are far away. They will never reach Europe, unlike men. Who would ever allow a woman to run away alone from home? But we can also not go that far. In Belarus, in fact, within the borders of Europe, an aging dictator in the year of the pandemic loses the elections and remains in power by force. The dictator takes this as weakness and, for his part, does not stop at any violence. He is now destroying all hotbeds of possible resistance, all potential opposition institutions. In Belarus, the PEN Club and the Writers' Union have been stripped of their legal personality. Nobel Prize winner Svetlana Alexievich has effectively emigrated. We see that political Europe expressed measured solidarity with the opposition, recognizes Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And if Lukashenko once again attempts an approach with Europe, what will be left of this solidarity? Or will geopolitical and bureaucratic interests once again prevail? And will the support of civil society, which is not involved in the political and geopolitical battle, be sufficient? Or take Russia. Undoubtedly, the situation here is incomparably better than in Belarus, not to mention Afghanistan. But we see a slow, inexorable and growing degradation of the institutions of information and of public opinion. In the last year and a half alone, a series of laws have been enacted that undermine and sometimes simply destroy the foundations of freedom of information, of free debate. The so-called education law has placed even popular lectures under total state control. In the past, the status of foreign agent, which has nothing to do with that of a foreign agent in the USA, was attributed only to legal personalities, including the meritorious Memorial Foundation, the Medusa Portal, and the Rain television channel. This automatically meant losing any possibility of financing themselves through advertising, but it still allowed them to survive and act in some way. Now, however, even natural people, for example, any journalist or writer, can be personally recognized as acting as a foreign agent. All it takes is three conditions: receiving money from abroad, perhaps a payment from friends or relatives there, being quoted publicly by a media outlet included in the list of foreign agents, a practically arbitrary decision by the Ministry of Justice, not regulated by any precise rule. At this point, one can forget the profession of journalist or the possibility of giving public lectures, earning money working in the humanities. There are now more than 15 people with this label, including some of my former students, and I wonder in dismay why I encouraged them into this profession, which was always dangerous but did not leave a journalist alone with his or her problems. Democracy, impossible without institutions of solidarity, is deeply in crisis. The first thing you want to do is go back to an understandable past. Only 2 years ago, during the migration crisis following the wars in Syria and Libya, there were fewer problems, but there was much more solidarity. But one of the most profound Russian theologians of the 20th century, Metropolitan Antony of Surosh, said, I quote, "We desperately struggle to return as quickly as possible to the condition of the past, rejecting the gift that is hidden in this action of God that frightens us." In what, we may ask ourselves, is the gift hidden in this crisis of democracy that frightens us? First of all, and this is the simplest thing, it consists in the lessons we can and must learn from the mistakes of the past. A just democracy cannot be built from the outside. After the defeat in Afghanistan, the time for exporting democracy is over. But, and this is the second thing, the export of solidarity is indispensable. We cannot allow ourselves to become enclosed in narrowly national problems, to build a closed Europe under the pretext of diatribes on the right or wrong vaccines, to give in to the temptation of digital dictatorship, to pretend that autarky can be compatible with democracy. While keeping in mind all health measures without haste, we must try to step by step to return to the open world of before the pandemic, which is similar to the world that we had in the 70s and 80s. We need to find new leaders for public opinion that can have a comparable role to what they had, to the roles that Pope John Paul II had, Don Luigi Giussani had. And we must try to live by feeling, to sort of go on a political diet and understand how fragile the world of democracy is, and continue in this way to find the values, the universal values that constitutes democracy. We should try to go back to the world that we had before the pandemic, which is the only world possible for our citizens. And remember that without any ideals, democracy will degenerate and will bend over on itself. Thank you.
Grazie ad Aleksandr
Thank you to Aleksandr Archangel'skij for giving us this this amazing evidence of the examples of Russian politics here, because how even in these totalitarian systems, that's an example that we all experienced decades ago. We saw how Russia was able, even under the sufferings of that regime, to keep alive the flame of freedom. Thank you very much, because it's a very important testimony you've given us here, and equally important. And for showing us how through the experience of people, how it's hard to live in certain situations and be able to keep open the kind of the door to freedom and for courage. I now ask to Luciano and Violante to take it up from here. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the invite, even this year. I hope we can see each other soon again in person. I wanted to start with a paradox, which is this: democracy is criticized where it is democracy, and it's desired where it isn't present. Why is this the case? So I think it's based on the fact that democracy doesn't exist in nature. It's the fruit of the intelligence and the work of people, and so it needs to be cultivated. I mean, cultivated really for freedom, the responsibility, which is something intrinsically linked to democracy. All these things need to be cultivated. When they're not cultivated, when they're left alone, when they're left in the wind, that's when democracy falters. And we can talk about words that are used often in political discussions: electoral democracies, imperfect democracies, semi-authoritarian democracies, partial democracies, that is, hypocritical democracies, competition, mixed regimes, hybrid regimes. So we've lost touch with this word, and when you lose touch with words like that, it means there's something underneath that's very deep that's driving it. It's something that the need for reflection's driving it here, like we're trying to do here, that's very deep on democracy. And the point is this: Lorenza, you were talking about Afghanistan, and there's an important point here, that democracy in Afghanistan, it can be proposed by persuasion, but not by force. Politics has this two ethics, even in internal politics, just like in global politics: the ethics of persuasion as opposed to imposition. Imposition by itself conflicts with the idea of democracy. How can you force someone to be democratic? If you force him, that means by and large, initially, he is not a democratic person. You know, there are positive aspects in these last 20 years in Europe, increased women's rights. There's mixed schools, increase in education, there are women present in public life, and increases to quality of life. Now, let's hope there are no steps back in these coming days. But we failed to convince people that democracy was compatible with their culture. We have to confront these themes with certain discussions, but it's tough. It's a tough conversation to have. And the third question: why is it so complex to confront these issues like our Russian friend here did with such lucidity, the question of hypocrisy and of democracy? I just want to repeat a previous analysis Pope Francis did. Beneath our eyes, very deep changes are occurring. Think for a minute, and I'll both you who are here and who is listening, that until 1990, we didn't have any of the technologies that we rely on today. Google came out in 91. The World Wide Web is from 1991. GPS, without which we couldn't get anywhere nowadays, came from May 2000. The iPhone didn't come out until Steve Jobs showed it in 2007. Facebook in 2004, Instagram in 2010. Zoom, which I'm talking to you now through, was invented in 2011. So I add all of this to the conquest of space determined by the space race after a decision by Obama in 2015. And so everything's changing before our eyes. And we need to be careful with how we classify things, though. We need to confront the need to discuss what we're living through now. So, let me tell you something that is dear to my heart. I hope it's not particularly wrong. Let's say that it's from the movement from medieval to Renaissance was characterized by a few things: the printing press and the discovery of America, the great geographic discoveries from the 14 to 1500s. That's how we moved from the medieval to the Renaissance era, and now we're having inventions as great as the printing press, that being the internet, and a geographic discovery, if we can call it like that, which is the discovery of space. And we should be careful with comparisons as always, but it's the mark of a new era. And why is it important to talk about these change of eras? Because with this information, we're in an era now. Changing an era now means that when we're in a crisis, and now it's a chance for transformation, a chance for movement towards a transformed world. And the visionaries of democracies, we know, need to be reinforced in given these new novelties that have come to light. So what we call crises perhaps are not in decline, but they're passages, the chances for change. Changes to what we will do. Will history see this as a period of declines or of changes? Are we wise enough to see what's happening around us? A more dynamic thought is necessary. I think we're often hit with nostalgia, caught with it, with the love for the past, when instead we need to look to the future. And here, I think there are some people around, at this meeting, there's lots of young people. In every generation, I talk about mine, which we're very old, but also, hopefully it applies to some younger people. We only had one great technological shift. The younger generations are living through more and more technological leaps and bounds. That means we don't need more erudite, entrenched minds, but more dynamic ones that are more adequate to live up to the task of rapid modernity. And democracy is the same thing. This is my opinion. We shouldn't have any nostalgia. We need to look carefully at what's going on ahead of us. We need to talk about more our democratic values, to defend them by proposing them freely to the world in which we live in. I think this is the great task, the responsibility we have, not to look back to the past, but to look to the future, and not to any generic future, but to have clearly in mind what we'd like to achieve. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Luciano, for this. Our talk here had at the heart this question as well in the title. What's the future of democracy? How will it configure itself? Here in Italy, we've seen a strong push from some parties with regards to direct democracy rather than representative democracy, which we all see in some limits to, for example, in this, like we spoke about the crisis of parties earlier. So this digital direct democracy, there's still a lot of open questions about it, leaves a lot of doubts. And looking to the future with this idea in mind is certainly rather problematic. But like Luciano told us, we need to accept the challenge, to step up and not be afraid of modernity, and not be afraid of facing different ideas, and to not be too nostalgic when faced with our past institutions. And now we'd like to hear from Professor Weiler. And from him, we'd like to have an idea of his experience, of his thoughts, and of everything what he talks about when he talks about these great words. Professor Weiler, let's hear from you. Thank you, Lorenza. This victory in Wembley was very fun, no? I felt very Italian myself. I'm sorry I've come 19 times from 2003, not 2005. Oh, blame the meeting who told me a lie. I've been coming from 2013, and now I'm only here kind of as a half. And I'm sorry for this for two reasons. First, because I wasn't able to hear to listen live to Javier Prades' excellent talk. Without offending anyone, it was the best lecture I've ever heard in the meeting in my life. And the second thing I'm sad for is I won't be able to give my lecture on the Bible. If I had the choice, I would have preferred the Bible to democracy as a subject for discussion today. And third, coming into the theme here, I felt a bit trapped here because the courage to be myself. And when I think about democracy, the greatest evil in Western democracy is that there's too much I. There's too little we, us. And so the challenge isn't, to be more I, but that this I needs to be, what I should I have the courage to be? What version of myself? The biggest problem I see with democracy, the fact that millions and millions of Europeans, are not only in Poland and Hungary, in France, but in France, in Italy, it seems to them that they're turning their back on liberal democratic values. And I don't think that from one day to another everyone's suddenly become a fascist. No, not at all. So why do so many Europeans, very decent people, do they say no to democracy, no to liberal styles of ruling? For me, the main reason is a crisis of values. You say, what crisis are you talking about? We have values. And this, I ask you, what are the values that all of us Europeans have in common? Immediately, we think democracy, basic human rights, a state founded on law, and it's true. These are essential values that we share, all of us. But thinking about this, they're very particular values, because even though they're fundamental, we wouldn't want to live in a society that doesn't respect these values. In a certain sense, they're empty, because they're rules of social behavior, of socio-political behavior, but they don't have a very specific content. Democracy is a way of ruling. It's not perfect, but it's better than all the others. But a democracy of evil people is still an evil democracy. And basic rights guarantee our freedoms. But they don't say what we should do with these freedoms. I have freedom of speech, so I should be I should be an inflamed homophobe. Why not? It's my freedom of speech. And the freedoms are a bit like democracy. Use your rights poorly, and your society will go poorly. So what's missing in our Western liberal democracies now? I'd like to offer that in the human condition, we look for a significance for a reason for our life. What does it mean? It's very simple. We would like our lives to have a real value, something that isn't just egotistical, that isn't something about me, my well-being, my life, my family. Which at the end of our life, you can think, the fact I've lived, have I've made a difference not only to my own personal destiny. And what's missing in liberal democratic politics in the West, which is missing this significance. I'd like to give three little examples here. So I ask you directly, who are watching, what are the values most important to you? Given that we're all CL here, I thought you'd be thinking, first, my faith, but second, almost none of you would say, I'm an Italian patriot. Well, why not? Because patriotism now, it's a bad word. It's got bad connotations. Patriotism means Mussolini, it means fascism, etc., etc. But it shouldn't have to be like this. There is such a thing as patriotic fascism, where everything pertains to the state. But there's also a strong republican tradition here, where instead of the people belonging to the state belongs to the people. And it's something we need to recover because it's essential. In the word democracy, there is demos kratia, the two Greek words. Without a strong idea of demos, the people, you cannot have demokratia. And the problem with what we're seeing in America, in Italy, in France, in Britain, in Poland, and many others, that there isn't just a normal distinction. You're a Democrat, a Christian Democrat, I'm a communist. Polarization says, you're not a true Italian, you're not a true Frenchman, you're not a true Polish person, a true Pole. And when we reach this polarization, there's no more democracy, because there's no longer this demos. Thinking about rights, they're incredibly important. Basic rights at Strasbourg, at Luxembourg, the whole court system. But the sense of our rights nowadays is that it puts the person at the center. They put yourself in the middle of the whole process. But they change this person who's now at the middle to a self-centered one. And this is not a good base for a democratic society. And then there's secularization. Now, I'm not here as an evangelist by any means. Not at all. And I don't judge a person according to their faith, because I know religious people who are horrible and atheists who are very noble. But what have we lost with secularization? Which Europe is now a secular continent. We've lost the voice every week in the public squares, in the churches, etc., that speaks not about rights but on needs, on your responsibilities and what you have to do. When the priest gives a homily, the church never talks about your rights, only about your responsibilities, your duty towards your others. And also this is an essential element for a democracy, for a vibrant one. So, what type of I do I want to be? First of all, an I that has the courage not only to blame others. Why doesn't the government do this? Why doesn't the council do that? Why isn't Europe doing this? But with honesty and integrity to ask, how have we failed to arrive at this state? This, yes, needs courage, this thought process. Secondly, to our politicians, I hope that every now and again they did something for the public good without thinking about their popularity, about what the polls will be like next election, like we had with the legal reform. That's courage, to do what you believe, not just to think, oh, is it popular? Do you want to be elected? Do you not want to? But to do something because it's truly right. The third thing is, in our life, in our private life, in our place of work, in our schools, in our parishes, what can I do that will give a significance to my life, that isn't only for my well-being, It can be small things, you know, organising a book club, helping people with their kids during the pandemic. There's always something that can be done. If we do all this, this is truly vibrant democracy. This is the courage not to blame others, but to say, what can I do to help? And finally, as a person of faith, I talk about humility. Humility, you can't do things, but you shouldn't do it with pride. To put ourselves in the public sphere, in our streets, and to give the example of a way of life that has great significance, of a worthwhile way of living. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Professor Weiler, because you've said a couple of things that have really touched us deeply concerning politics, but they really touch our experience directly, personally, and also of our experience as a collective. In our constitution, we have beautiful words that describe the value of solidarity and society, and we need this in order to understand how to form this way of government, which, by the way, is also generating a certain discontent amongst us. According to recent surveys on the value of democracy, many people in Italy and many young people have revealed their disappointment. When we see also the low rates of voting, and considering the valid experience that we've had with democracy, we see a real distancing from this ideal. We have many points that we could highlight, we could start from to continue this second round. And with this, let's try and go deeper into these points. One of these very interesting points was, and which was echoed by the other interventions, was the point of solidarity, the idea of being together, even on an international level. As Professor Archangel'skij, when there was a situation of dictatorship in Russia, everybody worked to try and be united in front of this by being dissident. I would like if Giovanna could translate this question for us. How can we make, within our experience as a civil society, on a European level, but on a national Russian level, how can we help this society grow, to sustain it? And within this society, how can we help the weakest ones of this society grow? This, in a simpler way, how can we be more united and show solidarity and support the people who support democracy in a country, no matter which country you come from, and therefore also in your own country? Thank you for giving me a second chance to talk. I can't give particular or specific advice to my European friends, but I would like to talk about my own personal experience on solidarity here in Russia. For example, there is this organization, Pen Club, and we naturally can't free our friends, journalists, and teachers who have been persecuted by the state. and who have helped collaborate with foreign states. But we are not silent. We are not completely quiet. We try to work with the Organization for International Journalists, and they can't say that they didn't know what is going on. At the same time, we can also, we have managed to launch certain crazy initiatives also. When we talk about democracy, we're not talking about real democracy, but in some way, we are trying to conserve within our civil society to a sense of usefulness, to help build bridges between intellectuals and Russian society. So I can't give any specific advice to you, Europeans, but this is what we're doing. And courage is necessary not only to help us speak out, but also to face, to continue to show a hand to those who are silent and the weakest in society. And courage is also needed in order to quote as the names of certain media and journalists, and to continue in this way to support them. I would like to underline the fact that a person who has been labeled as a foreign agent can't teach anymore, can't leave the country, can't come back into the country. They become in a certain way in their own country reject. Therefore, it is necessary for fear to come to an end. We're not part of the political system, but at the same time, we realize there's a lot of work to do in the field of, in civil society. And our battle, this is where we have moved our battle. These are the people that really need a hand, and they need solidarity that in our country exists, but it needs to extend itself beyond also the boundaries of our country. Thank you very much. We've always tried in the past to support people who have peculiar political situations, and we're very happy to be able to hear the voice of those who are completely immersed in these particular situations and who are alive and who are courageous enough not to be political but to be present in civil society. Luciano Violante, you spoke about the change of an era, the crisis that is the crisis of transformation. What is this transformation precisely? We also had Professor Weiler who talked about solidarity, community. How do we bring all of this into the political sphere? It's political in and of itself, but then we have our institutions, which where we also need to realize or make this presence concrete. Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have a recipe for success or a solution, but the only thing I can talk about is different experiences. As our Russian friend said, we now have the necessity to show the urgency to show solidarity and closeness. This is what we need for our democracy. The second question is, I thought of this reflecting on what Weiler said, we need community. There is an excess of solitude and loneliness. In this situation, I think that democracy should be considered as a coexistence, a sharing of the existence of the other. Without the dignity, the recognition of the dignity of the other, there is no democracy. In this situation, we need courage. And courage, one of the most important sources of courage, is to never rely on common opinion. The great transformations were made by minorities. We should have trust in the fact that we're a minority. We have trust in the minorities, because those are the ones that are capable to change the status quo and change the way things are. I'd like to make an example which I'm particularly attached to, which is an Italian example. So I apologize for our non-Italian friends who are listening. I'm talking about the referendum on euthanasia. This referendum has nothing to do with euthanasia, because it has to do with the legitimization of killing people who are sick. Okay. But there is no way of protecting these people. An important mandate that was signed by our Minister for Justice, Marta Cartabia, said that in this case it is admissible for euthanasia to exist. So it is to allow euthanasia for someone who in their home has asked to be killed. We can't be narcissistic in front of this situation. And when we talk about the value of life, we're talking about something that is a human right. We're talking about the foundations of our democracy. We cannot afford to rely on common opinion, but we must have trust and in the fact that we can persuade people of the positivity of democracy, and we should never. We can't afford to not make an effort in this sense, because if we stop thinking, we will stop reacting and stop making an effort. So the best thing for this situation is to become active and find a meaning within the situation for the future.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you also to Luciano. And thank you for reminding us about this big Italian ongoing debate on euthanasia, which is something we're going to have to participate in soon. And I'd like to remind of a phrase I was reading today in one of Luciano's articles, after saying, he kind of repeated what he's just told us now. He said that it struck me a lot that good intentions, because often these facts are accompanied, they come from people who appear to have perfectly noble intentions. These good intentions don't protect people from consequences. So we'll have another way to keep talking about this topic soon, the topic of solidarity. It was one that involves even the weakest in our society. And if a democracy forgets its weakest members, like Sandele and other theorists who wrote about this were saying, if a democracy loses its solidarity, it's doomed. It's doomed to or die from the inside. So I want to ask Professor Weiler a small final consideration. The question of obligations is a fluctuating one. From Cicero onwards, we've always seen how societies are based on then what people are obligated to do, and they're ever so important. These even more nowadays, these considerations. So I'd like to deepen slightly on the topic of patriotism, because patriotism it can be a factor of solidarity. Doesn't necessarily, you don't need to have a march on Rome to be a patriot, but constitutional patriotism, the love for your country, how does it enter into our thoughts on democracy? How does it, as part of a vibrant democracy that continues to be nourished by the sovereign people, in inverted commas? Lorenza, seeing that we've only got 2 minutes left. No, let's make it 10. I would like to say something on Afghanistan quickly, because what's happening in Afghanistan, it's hard to watch. The future under a Taliban regime for the Afghan people, and especially for the women there, it's unthinkable. But this criticism of European leaders, Italians, Spaniards, French, German, and many others, with respect to the US, it's something that makes me laugh. Hypocrisy, it's incredible, the levels of hypocrisy. In 20 years, the US has spent $2 trillion, 2 with 12 zeros, dollars in Afghanistan. They lost 2,530 soldiers. How many soldiers did Italy lose defending democracy in Afghanistan? France, that pulled out in 2012. Spain, that never set foot there. Germany, that never set foot there. And it's the same phenomenon. It's always giving blame to others and never asking oneself, what did we do wrong? What did we do to protect Afghani democracy? Other than just rivers and rivers of crocodile tears. You know, it's very tragic, but the American public is tired of it. And this is a democracy. After 20 years, they've said enough's enough. It's tragic, but before criticizing, it's worth asking yourself, what have we done in these last 20 years to protect Afghanistan's democracy? Thank you. So I should say that this topic was carried ahead a lot because the sacrifice of American soldiers can't really leave anyone indifferent like that. And European leaders today tend to push the blame onto others that Europe, you know, as part of a coalition, certainly didn't absolve itself of, and possibly won't absolve itself, because the sense of solidarity towards refugees or migrants, we've seen just how weak that is in the recent years in Europe. And I'd like to say a quick thing here that we've worked a lot on in these days, and I say that obviously, I say this with humility, like Professor Weiler asked. We've also seen in these days many very noble things that have been done by soldiers, by simple people, by the people who are there on the ground, who are helping person by person to get out of the situation in Afghanistan and to find, hopefully, in our or in other countries, somewhere where they can live a more dignified life, without forgetting, obviously, the millions of people who will stay there, who will be left behind. But for this, I thank you for reminding us of this. We need to think about the way in which we look at history. We need to look at history always with realism in mind, be pragmatic, but also asking ourselves, what can we do? And I'm convinced that the element of the idea of welcoming, that's it's a characterization of our people, not of our politics, but that it can be expressed in a positive fashion. Good. So now we'll come to a conclusion. We've got very few minutes left. I thank deeply all of our guests here today, and I think we've had a very practiced example of democracy, to know different examples, to look at into the future, to hear a criticism, even a passionate one, with regards to certain choices that countries are making nowadays. It's important. It's important to hear that, because the future of democracy is an experience that can be had. The courage of politics is, first of all, the courage of every one of us. So I thank you all. I thank everyone who's been listening patiently, both in person and online. And allow me to conclude this conference with now, please don't take this as a cliche. We all know that the meeting is a unique place, it remains on its feet is because of your contributions and those of our volunteers. So we ask you humbly but decisively that hopefully on everyone's behalf, participation, even active, to the life of the meeting in the simplest way possible, is, other than that of diffusing the ideas that the meeting tries to export, to produce, is to give some economic assistance. Across the whole Fiera, you can see stations called Dona Ora, Donate Now, which are marked by a red heart. And these donations have to come specifically through the required desks. So don't leave money lying around, but look for the volunteers wearing a red shirt with Donate Now written on it, Dona Ora, and refer to them if you'd like to help us. Written on it, Dona Ora, and refer to them if you'd like to help us, to ensure that the meeting could keep surviving. It's unimaginable without the gracious generosity of the volunteers, of our guests, of the people who give their time and money, and also without the generosity of those who give a part of their own money, so that next year hopefully we can meet each other again soon. Your support is a gift that truly opens the world. Have a good meeting, and we hope to see you again next time.